It gives me great pleasure to introduce Gene Procknow. Gene is someone that I know well. If you read his bio, you saw that he has degrees in both business and history. Little difference there, but maybe not too much. But I know him from the business side of the equation. He is a respected and cherished mentor and personal friend and colleague. He was the former CEO of Deloitte Federal Practice at Deloitte. And when it comes to the history side, I knew that Gene retired or rewired, and I knew that he was a history buff. And I knew he was doing a lot of research. And when Gene gets focused. And the research was one reason that I was very curious about the whole topic of American history. And in particular, bringing it back to Rotary, we all know that peace and understanding is something that's very important to us. And I have felt that better understanding of American history, investing the time to read and learn more is a pathway to understanding and peace. So I recently read his book, and I told him that's all I would say because I don't want to eat into his time. So I'm going to shut up. I recently read his book, which he will introduce, and I must say, it's not just a history book. It's a book that actually gives you insight through the lens of ordinary people back at that time, and I found it fascinating, and I want you guys to learn more about what Gene is doing and how he has accomplished this. Gene Procknow.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon, Rotarians. I'm really excited to be here and also excited to see the folks on Zoom. So hopefully this comes through well for the Zoomers here, because I know that's important here in the process. I'm going to talk about a guy named William Hunter, and a very nondescript name, but he's done 4 extraordinary things in his life that I want to talk about today briefly. The first is that as a child of a British sergeant in the 26th Regiment of Foot, he wrote about his experiences during the American Revolution. Back during the Revolution, families traveled with their soldiers, something we don't think about today. But they actually, he accompanied his father on campaign. And I'll talk a little bit about the things that he saw. But I can guarantee you, he grew up twice as fast as a normal person because he saw so many things in combat at such an early age. This guy grew up really fast. The second thing I want to tell you about is a story of an immigrant. As a son of a British soldier, after the war, he went back to Britain, but he found that the United States was something special for him, and he immigrated to the United States afterwards. So think about this. Your father fought against the United States, and I'm going to become an immigrant to the United States. Pretty powerful stuff. The third thing is that when he came back to the United States, he came back as a newspaper printer. He founded 4 newspapers in our country. The second newspaper west of the Alleghenies in Pennsylvania, and he was the first newspaper editor to decry the Alien and Sedition Act. That was an act that put a muzzle on free press back in John Adams's administration. And so he was the first one to decry that. And actually, the ASGA, we heard about the Assistant U.S. Attorney General. Back then, they had those things too. The one in Pennsylvania said, we're going to charge this guy with seditious libel. And so that charge went all the way up to John Adams. John Adams said no, because they didn't believe they could get a jury in Kentucky where he lived to convict him. So they chose Matthew Lyons in Vermont instead, where they had a favorable Federalist lean jury, and they convicted Matthew Lyons. So very, very courageous, an immigrant who basically took on the U.S. government. And then fourth, became an ardent Democrat. And not in the Democratic Party, but in the small d basis of as during that period to get more and more people to be allowed to vote. And so he became a strong supporter of Andrew Jackson. When Jackson was elected, he came to Washington, D.C. and to join the Jackson administration. He served in the Department of Treasury, rooting out fraud and abuse. We'd heard about Doge earlier. He has successful Doge, I got to tell one story about that. That's kind of fun. So anyway, so he comes to Washington, and he's in charge of auditing the U.S. Navy. So it was one guy, big job, small Navy, right? So different than today. So what he did, found out the captains of the ship were going out and buying for $1. Selling it to the government for $2. And so pretty good deal if you're a captain. They use a lot of cords on the ship. So he ended that practice. They found a tremendous amount of savings through efficiencies. And it's really interesting reading about how he did that. So those are the four things extraordinary about him. There are no extant pictures of him, and there's really hardly any descriptions of him. So what I've done here is, in fact, the Rotary here is the first people to see this. I decided that I could use artificial intelligence to create a picture. So that's what this is. This is artificial intelligence. The person on the left there in the British uniform is John Hunter. That's a sergeant's uniform in the 26th Regiment of Foot. The boy right in front of him is William Hunter. The small girl there is Sarah Hunter, his younger sister, and his wife, his mother, is Margaret Hunter. And this picture depicts their early life. They came to America before the Revolution and during peacetime. And so that's what this connotes. They're standing in front of the Raritan River. William was born in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and the background of the barracks that the Americans built for the British Army. A much, much different situation that happened in Boston. So they actually got along really well. So now let me tell you another story. Anybody, you go to a dinner party, people you don't know in the neighborhood, and they always sit you down next to someone you don't know, right? It's like what you do here, right? To get the networking going. So I sat next to this woman, and she asked me, "What do I do?" And I said, "Well, I'm changing careers. I'm changing from being a management consultant to being a historian, and I'm going back to school, and I'm very, very interested in the American Revolution." So she goes to me, "Oh, that's interesting. We have a diary in our basement. It comes from ancestors that I don't even know. I think it's the Revolution. It might be the Civil War. I'm not sure. Can you look at this diary?" So this is actually one of 26 pages. It's written in beautiful 18th century handwriting, and this was written, and the diary was written by a child of the British soldier, and so it was missing the first 2 pages, and there was missing several other pages in it, and it ended abruptly in 1793, and so there was no name. So I had to figure out who this was. So my quest here was to figure out, is it authentic? Is it real? Is it, and who is this? So I went through a lot of forensic analysis to figure out, triangulating information in the diary with information I could find from other primary sources. So I figured out that in the diary, it said his father was a sergeant in the 26th Regiment of Foot. So I got a list of all the sergeants that brought their families with them. And then at the end of the diary, it said that he started a printing company in Philadelphia and came in 1793, the middle of the yellow fever epidemic. And so I went through a list of all the printing companies in Philadelphia and cross-referenced that. Eventually, I was able to find a lot more information that establishes the authenticity of this diary. I've got other copies of his handwriting, for example, and other primary sources, and a lot of information. So I'm dead certain that this is William Hunter, I'm very, very confident that that's the case. It has just enough errors in it that would be made by a young boy to make it authentic, right? Because it wasn't perfected. Fakes sometimes are overly perfected. You know, like he said, his father was in the Grenadier Company. Grenadier Company is like the elite of the elite in the British Army. His father was not in the Grenadier Company. But what happened during the war with him is that he accompanied his father. His father was fought and was egregiously injured in one of the opening battles of the American Revolution in the border between the United States and Canada at a place called Fort St. John. Great place to visit, by the way, just over the border from Canada and Quebec. A great place to visit if you get a chance to see that. His father was egregiously injured there, was in a gunpowder explosion. A shell came into and hit the gunpowder, blew up, and his father was really badly injured. And the rebels captured the fort, and so William and his family went into a POW camp. And so after spending a winter in Canada at this POW, he was sent along a sleigh across the Lake Champlain. Back then we didn't have global warming, so it was all iced over it. And the way they transported was a sleigh. And it's amazing what he talks about in that, and how they had to get over open water and horses fell in. It's a phenomenal story. And then when he goes to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and back then it was a horrible smallpox epidemic. And William contracted smallpox, but he had a mild case. And so he became a carrier, and he went from place to place, and a doctor hit the pustules from his injuries to inoculate other people. And I think he probably made some money by doing that, because the doctor made a pound per patient, so which was a lot of money back then. So the doctors got rich doing that. So he spent about a year in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and then his father was exchanged and brought back into the Army, and he had to go back into combat. And so what you're looking down here is you're looking down the gun barrel of a 24-pound massive gun that the rebels had put guarding the Hudson River. That's the Hudson River. And what happens is, where that bridge is at a corner, and you go around the corner, and the ships have to slow, so the cannon's got a good shot at them. So that's what the rebels did. Well, the British were pretty smart people. The idea that the British were not good, bush fighters and not very good at fighting in the mountainous terrain of the United States was just not true. So the British decided, including William Hunter's father, they marched around that hill on the right side there on the back and attacked the fort by the rear. And so they ended up capturing the fort, but after a very, very bloody battle. And they were successful. It was one of the bloodiest assaults of the war. This part of the journal is just gut-wrenching. What happened was that his father didn't come back at first. They sent back the wounded and the dead first in wagons. And so this is a picture of William Hunter going from wagon to wagon looking for his father. And when he didn't find his father, the palpable relief in the journal is just unbelievable. It's amazing. You can imagine a 10-year-old boy who's probably really 20, in terms of years, having to do that. So looking for his father. Yeah, so that's what he did. His father went back into combat, and this is he went to Philadelphia to assault and capture the rebel capital in Philadelphia. Along the way, right outside of Philadelphia, William's on this ship. The ship next to them got blown up like this. So when I said he grew up quickly, he grew up quickly. It's pretty amazing. And see, I was able to triangulate. I know the name of that ship, and I know that when it was hit, and so I could tell the ship that he was on. And so it's able to triangulate all the information in the diary. So William Hunter's father, John Hunter, was basically, after 3 years of combat, he was worn out. He was in his late 40s, and he couldn't sustain the rigors of additional warfare. Back then, 3 years in combat is a long time. It's 3 years in combat today is a long time too, but back then you were just physically worn out. So we went back to England on the ship like this, gets to the English Channel. A French privateer came out, captured him. So he spent another year in a prisoner of war camp. And finally, his father was exchanged again, and he moved to England that he never saw before. So when I say he came back home, he'd never been to England before. And so became a printer. And he got apprenticed as a printer. His father bought the apprenticeship for him. His father wanted him to go and become a soldier. The mother said, no way. And you are not going to be a soldier. We've seen enough death and destruction. You're not going to do that. The mother won out. And so he became a printer. And he at back that time, he met a lot of famous people. And if you when you read the book, you'll see a lot of famous people he met there. But he became an ardent anti-monarchist. He didn't want the monarchy that they had in England. And so he was a Republican in the true sense of, not true sense, in the word sense of the small R Republican that wanted to live in a republic, and he wanted free speech. And that's what he couldn't find in England. And so he founded these newspapers. And this is where the Western Telegraph is the one in Pennsylvania. The two below are the ones in Frankfort, Kentucky. He was very, very successful here. At the time, he also got into, you'll be very interested in this as Rotarians, he got into community service. He started the first secondary school in Kentucky for women. He started a library. So he's very, very community service oriented, served 10 years on the Frankfort City Council. And then he also served in the Kentucky State Legislature. So he became very, very civic minded during this period of time. And when I said he came back to Washington, D.C. to serve Andrew Jackson, I haven't mentioned much about his wife. He married Ann Hunter. They had 5 children. 3 lived to adulthood. They had a phenomenal marriage. And how I know they had a phenomenal marriage is that, see that obelisk there? That's a congressional cemetery just down the road here. And when his wife died about 10 years after him, she wrote in her will, no one gets any of our money until they build that monument. And if you look on the right side of her, on the left side from where you are, there's a little gray slab. That's her grave. So this woman loved him. I mean, for 10 years later to do that and to spend the money to make that happen. So he's buried among a lot of pretty famous people there. It's a phenomenal story. It's a story of courage. It's a story of immigration. It's a story of serving government properly. And I think it's been a labor of love for me. It took me 4.5 years to put this book together. It's all based upon primary sources. So it's a lot of sources. So with that, I'll just, and the other thing just to mention in the book here at the cover, that's Washington, D.C. in 1930. Doesn't look like the Capitol today, but this is what Washington, D.C., this is when William Hunter was in Washington, what it looked like. So with that, if we have time, I'll answer some questions.
Thank you so much for being with us. That was a great story. I like to write myself a little bit, and research is a mystery. And it seems to me that you use all these forensic tools. But what was the biggest one you had to solve? What was the hardest single thing you had to solve in order to write your book?
Well, one of the biggest things is that name of William Hunter is back then is nondescript. I found 8 William Hunters that could have been this guy. William Hunters that were newspaper editors, William Hunters that were sons of British sergeants, and unduplicating my William Hunter from those 8 William Hunters was a real chore. It took me 4.5 years to do, but I think the first research was a couple of years. And I did a lot of work and a lot of archival research, both here in Kentucky, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. A lot of it comes from archival research.
I'm a little bit confused about how he came to the United States and all of a sudden was so successful. Can you give us a little bit of background about him getting off the boat and then all of a sudden he's this big newspaper editor? Publisher?
Okay, well, and that's a very good point. Well, he came here with a skill. I mean, he had a skill. He knew how to do typeset and copy set and how to operate a printing press. And so he did have some early not successful ventures. His first venture was he thought that there was a huge need for a Spanish language a book to teach people the Spanish language. And that turned out to be not so successful. However, if you want to buy that book today, you can buy it for about $2,000. So, I don't know what success is. He had some failures along the way. He had partners along the way. But at that time, he moved west. He moved out of Philadelphia very quickly. There was too much competition in Philadelphia. If he stayed in Philadelphia, he would not have been successful. So moving west, and it went to a place on the crossroads of the National Road. So the National Road was one of the first roads going over the Alleghenies. He found that crossroads, and they needed a newspaper in that town. And back then, you weren't a real town unless you had a newspaper. And so he found a town without a newspaper. That's really what propelled him.
Over here, it's always said that history is written by the victor, and or the person that wrote it down. And I know when I was in college, I had a history class called the Economic History of the United States, which was completely different than the God, motherhood, and apple pie that I'd learned through junior high school and high school. Was there any insight that you gained into like the history of our country and what was really going on that came to light in looking at Mr. Hunter's life and what he experienced that was different than the normal narrative that we're taught?
Well, that's a really good question. And a couple of things is that his path was not a straight line. In 1819, there was something called the Panic of 1819. It basically was after the War of 1815 or 1812. A lot of bad things happened, and there was a huge panic. And so he actually ended up going bankrupt and had to reinvent himself. And that's why so many newspapers and so many other things he did, and he wasn't alone. I mean, Thomas Jefferson lost all of his money in the Panic of 18. Most business people went out of business. So I think the lesson learned is that we can look back and see so much success today and look back and see success back then. We forget about the things that go down. It wasn't a straight line, and not a straight line at all. He had some really rough times. So I think that's a huge lesson for everybody to take away.
Thank you very much for this incredible presentation. So we as a family moved here US 6 years ago, and me and my son, we are still trying to understand and learn as much as we can about the culture, history of this country. So my son studies business analytics in college, but he found out that his passion is history, and he chooses history as elective classes all the time. And I told him, to be able to be successful in life, you need to blend your passion with your business. He said, my passion is history and soccer. But he says, Mom, I don't know how to blend with history with the business. So you have both sides right now. So suggestion to a young guy who history but needs to make a living in the future. How does it happen?
What I would tell him is that that's a really good question. It is a good question. I would tell him is that think a bit out of the box. Don't think that if you study history, you get a PhD, you got to go into the teaching profession in a college and earn, beginning salaries in that profession are very, very low, very difficult. One of the people I know really well that's I've worked with, a historian, what she did was she lives in Boston. She got her PhD. She started a touring company, and she's phenomenally successful. It's Brooke Barbier is her name, and so I think there's a lot of history things that you can do that are more what we would call public history. You can get jobs in that, and that can be as rewarding. Ken Burns, there's one of the historians in Ken Burns is works for the U.S. Park Service, and he's had a phenomenal career as a historian there. I've got other friends that have been in the Department of Defense history. So there are other careers, there are broader careers than just thinking, if you like history, you got to go into academia. That may be one thing he wants to do, but there's a lot of other things that are broader.
thank you for your presentation. I heard you mention earlier in your presentation that I think you said you made a career shift to become a historian. Why did you do that? And what piqued your interest to become a historian?
Well, as Linda knows, at Deloitte, I worked for Deloitte with Linda. We got a gift. The company usually don't get gifts from companies, but we got a gift. Our gift was you got to retire at 62. So there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You're gone at 62. So and so I was too young to retire. And I always had, like the question about your child, I always had a passion for history. I could never make it work beforehand. So now I could make it work. And so really that's what allowed me to do this. I went back to school. As Linda mentioned, I got a history degree, a master's of history degree from Norwich University, which was a phenomenal place to do that.
So, right, as part of the title, Finding Free Speech, I had to ask a question related to that topic. And I guess, it seems like William Hunter was always in the position of having to kind of defend or fight, for free speech. And if I think about, today's world and where we're at, not to get, too political or otherwise, but it seems that there are a lot of different opinions about the media. And I guess I'd be curious to know if you think there are any lessons from kind of William Hunter's time and his experience that we might take away and apply to our thinking today.
A couple of things. One, that's a really good question, and it deserves more than I can give it right now. But media back then was intensely partisan. One of his first newspapers, he tried to be bipartisan. He had a partner that was a Federalist, and he was a Democratic Republican. That didn't work. So you couldn't be bipartisan. And he started a newspaper in Louisville, Kentucky, because Andrew Jackson needed votes in Louisville, Kentucky. So newspaper started. That was the fourth one wasn't listed up there. And then after the election, the newspaper went out of business. And the other thing about it is that fake news was fake news. You printed within 2 weeks of the election. You printed whatever you wanted to print because you couldn't pick up. No one could fact check you within 2 weeks because it took 2 weeks. And so fake news abounded back then. So we're actually better at fake news today than they were back then.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. It's incredibly serendipitous to come across such a, unique journal. And I guess my question is, how are you thinking about finding the next topic for the next book?
Well, it has to come. But I'm writing a book now called From Royal to Rebel: 13 Experiments in American Democracy. And it's about the first 13 state constitutions that were done during the Revolutionary War. So that's what I'm working on now.
In authenticating the diary, I was just curious, is there technology to date the paper?
I have not done that. The rest of the story is that after my book was published, the family donated the diary to the Museum of the American Revolution, so you could see it in Philadelphia. If you go there and see it, the paper is linen paper, and so it is period appropriate paper because it's a high linen content paper. So that's a good question. I did not do that though.
Good job, Gene. Good job. Give him another hand. Give him another hand. He made history, what we would say, sexy and exciting. Gene, I was taught that they say Lancaster like Lancaster. And it was the capital of the United States for one day. My birthday, September 27. All right, I had to get that in. But we got a tree for you. We're gonna plant a tree in your name. Here is your certificate. These are the fine details where you can learn about where your tree is. It's standing right next to one of those famous monuments. Give him another round of applause.